Part 2 of Crime and Punishment. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Carl Manchester, 2009. Let us see how these precautions work. Exile, which is still practiced by some governments, and imprisonment are, according to the theory of law, for the purpose of reforming the criminal, that he may no longer be a menace to society. Logic would say that anyone who wished to obliterate cruelty from the character of another must himself show no cruelty. One who would teach regard for the rights of others must himself be regardful. Yet the story of exile and prison is the story of the lash, the iron, the chain, and every torture that the fiendish ingenuity of the non-criminal class can devise by way of teaching criminals to be good. To teach men to be good, they are kept in airless cells, made to sleep on narrow planks, to look at the sky through iron grates, to eat food that revolts their palates and destroys their stomachs, battered and broken down in body and soul, and this is what they call reforming men. Not very many years ago, the Philadelphia dailies told us, and while we cannot believe all of what they say, and are bound to believe that such cases are exceptional, yet the bare facts were true, that Judge Gordon ordered an investigation into the workings of the Eastern Penitentiary officials, and it was found that an insane man had been put into a cell with two sane ones, and when he cried in his insane way, and the other two asked that he be put elsewhere, the warden gave them a strap to whip him with, and they tied him in some way to the heater with the strap, so that his legs were burned when he moved. All scarred with the burns, he was brought into the court, and the other men frankly told what they had done and why they had done it. This is the way they reform men. Do you think that people come out of a place like that better, with more respect for society, with more regard for the rights of their fellow men? I don't. I think they come out of there with their hearts full of bitterness, much harder than when they went in. That this is often the case is admitted by those who themselves believe in punishment and practice it. For the fact is that out of the criminaloid class there develops the habitual criminal, the man who is perpetually getting in prison. No sooner is he out than he does something else and gets in again. The brand that at first scorched him has succeeded in scarring. He no longer feels the ignominy. He is a jail-bird, and he gets to have a cynical pride in his own degradation. Every man's hand is against him, and his hand is against every man's. Such are the reforming effects of punishment. Yet there was a time when he too might have been touched, had the right word been spoken. It is for society to find and speak that word. This for prison and exile. Hanging, electrocution, these of course are not for the purpose of reforming the criminal. These are to deter others from doing as he did, and the supposition is that the severer the punishment, the greater the deterrent effect. In commenting upon this principle, Blackstone says, quote, "We may observe that punishments of unreasonable severity have less effect in preventing crimes and amending the manners of a people than such as are more merciful in general." End quote. He further quotes Montesquieu, quote, "For the excessive severity of laws hinders their execution. When the punishment surpasses all measure, the public will frequently, out of humanity, prefer impunity to it." End quote. Again Blackstone, quote, "It is a melancholy truth that among the variety of actions which men are daily liable to commit, no less than 160 have been declared by Act of Parliament to be felonies, worthy of instant death. So dreadful a list, instead of diminishing, increases the number of offenders." End quote. Robert Ingersoll, speaking on crimes against criminals before the New York Bar Association, a lawyer addressing lawyers, treating of this same period of which Blackstone writes, says, quote, "There is something in injustice, in cruelty, which tends to defeat itself. There never were so many traitors in England as when the traitor was drawn and quartered, when he was tortured in every possible way, when his limbs, torn and bleeding, were given to the fury of mobs, or exhibited pierced by pikes or hung in chains. The frightful punishments produced intense hatred of the government, and traitors increased until they became powerful enough to decide what treason was and who the traitors were, and to inflict the same torments on others." End quote. The fact that Blackstone was right and Ingersoll was right in saying that severity of punishment increases crime is silently admitted in the abrogation of those severities by Acts of Parliament and Acts of Congress. It is also shown by the fact that there are no more murders proportionately in states where the death penalty does not exist than in those where it does. Severity is therefore admitted by the state itself to have no deterrent influence on the intending criminal. And to take the matter out of the province of the state, we have only to instance the horrible atrocities perpetrated by white mobs upon negroes charged with outrage. Nothing more fiendishly cruel can be imagined, yet these outrages multiply. It would seem, then, that the notion of making a horrible example of the misdoer is a complete failure. As a specific example of this, Ingersoll, in the same lecture, instanced that, quote, "a few years before, a man was hanged in Alexandria, Virginia. One who witnessed the execution on that very day murdered a peddler in the Smithsonian grounds at Washington. He was tried and executed, and one who witnessed his hanging went home and on the same day murdered his wife." End quote. Evidently the brute is rather aroused than terrified by scenes of execution. What then? If extreme punishments do not deter, and if what are considered mild punishments do not reform, is any measure of punishment conceivable or attainable which will better our case? Before answering this question, let us consider the class of crimes which so far has not been dwelt upon, but which nevertheless comprises probably 9/10 of all offences committed. These are all the various forms of stealing: robbery, burglary, theft, embezzlement, forgery, counterfeiting, and the 1001 ramifications and offshoots of the act of taking what the law defines as another's. It is impossible to consider crimes of violence apart from these, because the vast percentage of murders and assaults committed by the criminaloid class are simply incidental to the commission of the so-called lesser crime. A man often murders in order to escape with his booty, though murder was no part of his original intention. Why, now, have we such a continually increasing percentage of stealing? Will you persistently hide your heads in the sand and say it is because men grow worse as they grow wiser, that individual wickedness is the result of all our marvellous labours to compass sea and land and make the earth yield up her wealth to us? Dare you say that? It is not so. The reason men steal is because their rights are stolen from them before they are born. A human being comes into the world. He wants to eat, he wants to breathe, he wants to sleep. He wants to use his muscles, his brain. He wants to love, to dream, to create. These wants constitute him, the whole man. He can no more help expressing these activities than water can help running downhill. If the freedom to do any of these things is denied him, then by so much he is a crippled creature, and his energy will force itself into some abnormal channel, or be killed altogether. Now, I do not mean that he has a natural right to do these things inscribed on any law book of nature. Nature knows nothing of rights. She knows power only, and a louse has as much natural right as a man to the extent of its power. What I do mean to say is that man, in common with many other animals, has found that by associative life he conquers the rest of nature, and that this society is slowly being perfected, and that this perfectionment consists in realizing that the solidarity and safety of the whole arises from the freedom of the parts, that such freedom constitutes man's social right, and that any institution which interferes with this right will be destructive of the association, will breed criminals, will work its own ruin. This is the word of the sociologist, of the greatest of them, Herbert Spencer. Now do we see that all men eat? Eat well? You know we do not. Some have so much that they are sickened with the extravagance of dishes, and know not where next to turn for a new palatal sensation. They cannot even waste their wealth. Some, and they are mostly the hardest workers, eat poorly and fast, for their work allows them no time to enjoy even what they have. Some, I have seen them myself in the streets of New York this winter, and the look of their wolfish eyes was not pleasant to see, stand in long lines waiting for midnight and the plate of soup dealt out by some great newspaper office, stretching out whole blocks of them, as other men wait on the first night of some famous star at the theatre. Some die because they cannot eat at all. Pray tell me what these last have to lose by becoming thieves, and why shall they not become thieves? And is the action of the man who takes the necessities which have been denied to him really criminal? Is he morally worse than the man who crawls in a cellar and dies of starvation? I think not. He is only a little more assertive. Cardinal Manning said, quote, "A starving man has a natural right to his neighbour's bread." End quote. The anarchist says, quote, "A hungry man has a social right to bread." End quote. And there have been whole societies and races among whom that right was never questioned, and whatever were the mistakes of those societies whereby they perished, this was not a mistake, and we shall do well to take so much wisdom from the dead and gone. The simple ethics of the stomach, which with all our achievement we cannot despise, or despising shall perish as our reward. But, you will say, and say truly, to begin by taking loaves means to end by taking everything, and murdering too, very often. And in that you draw the indictment against your own system. If there is no alternative between starving and stealing, and for thousands there is none, then there is no alternative between society's murdering its members, or the members disintegrating society. Let society consider its own mistakes. Then let it answer itself for all these people it has robbed and killed. Let it cease its own crimes first. To return to the faculties of man. All would breathe, and some do breathe. They breathe the air of the mountains, of the seas, of the lakes, even the atmosphere in the gambling dens of Monte Carlo, for a change. Some, packed thickly together in closed rooms where men must sweat and faint to save tobacco, breathe the noisome reek that rises from the spittle of their consumptive neighbours. Some, mostly babies, lie on the cellar doors along Bainbridge Street on summer nights and bathe their lungs in that putrid air where 1,000 lungs have breathed before, and grow up pale and decayed, looking as the rotting vegetables whose exhalations they draw in. Some, far down underground, meet the choke damp, and do not breathe at all. Do you expect healthy morals out of these poisoned bodies? Some sleep. They have so much time that they take all manner of expensive drugs to try what sleeping it off a different way is like. Some sleep upon none too easy beds a few short hours, too few not to waken more tired than ever, and resume the endless grind of waking life. Some sleep bent over the books they are too tired to study, though the mind clamours for food after the long day's physical toil. Some sleep with hand upon the throttle of the engine after 26 hours of duty, and crash. They have sleep enough. Some use their muscles. They use them to punch bags and other gentlemen's stomachs when their heads are full of wine. Some use them to club other men and women at $2.50 a day. Some exhaust them, welding them into iron, or weaving them into wool for 10 or 11 hours a day, and some become atrophied, sitting at desks till they are mere spectres of men and women. Some love, and there is no end to the sensualities of their love, because all normal expressions have lost their savour through excess. Some love and see their love tried and worn and threadbare, a skeleton of love, because the practicality of life is always there to repress the purely emotional. Some are stricken in health, so robbed of power to feel that they never love at all. And some dream, think, create, and the world is filled with the glory of their dreams. But who knows the glory of the dream that never was born? Lost and dead and buried away somewhere, there under the roofs where the exquisite brain was ruined by the heavy labour of life. And what of the dream that turned to madness and destroyed the thing it loved the best? These are the things that make criminals, the perverted forces of man, turned aside by the institution of property, which is the giant social mistake today. It is your law which keeps men from using the sources and the means of wealth production unless they pay tribute to other men. It is this and nothing else which is responsible for all the second class of crimes and all those of violence incidentally committed while carrying out a robbery. Let me quote here a most sensible and appropriate editorial which recently appeared in the Philadelphia North American, in comment upon the proposition of some foolish preacher to limit the right of reproduction to rich families. Quote, "The earth was constructed, made habitable, and populated without the advice of a commission of superior persons, and until they appeared and began meddling with affairs, making laws, and setting themselves up as rulers, poverty and its evil consequences were unknown to humanity. When social science finds a way to remove obstructions to the operation of natural law and to the equitable distribution of the products of labour, poverty will cease to be the condition of the masses of people, and misery, crime, and problems of population will disappear." End quote. And they will never disappear until it does. All hunting down of men, all punishments, are but so many ineffective efforts to sweep back the tide with a broom. The tide will fling you, broom and all, against the idle walls that you have built to fence it in. Tear down those walls, or the sea will tear them down for you. Have you ever watched it coming in, the sea? When the wind comes roaring out of the mist, and a great bellowing thunders up from the water, have you watched the white lions chasing each other towards the walls, and leaping up with foaming anger as they strike and turn and chase each other along the black bars of their cage in rage to devour each other, and tear back and leap in again? Have you ever wondered in the midst of it all which particular drops of water would strike the wall? If one could know all the factors, one might calculate even that. But who can know them all? Of one thing only we are sure: some must strike it. They are the criminals, those drops of water pitching against that silly wall and broken. Just why it was these particular ones we cannot know, but some had to go. Do not curse them. You have cursed them enough. Let the people free. There is a class of crimes of violence which arises from another set of causes than economic slavery. Acts which are the result of an antiquated moral notion of the true relations of men and women. These are the nemesis of the institution of property in love. If everyone would learn that the limit of his right to demand a certain course of conduct in sex relations is himself, that the relation of his beloved ones to others is not a matter for him to regulate, any more than the relations of those whom he does not love, if the freedom of each is unquestioned, and whatever moral rigours are exacted and exacted of oneself only, if this principle is accepted and followed, crimes of jealousy will cease. But religions and governments uphold this institution, and constantly tend to create the spirit of ownership, with all its horrible consequences. Ah, you will say, perhaps it is true. Perhaps when this better social condition is evolved, and this freer social spirit, we shall be rid of crime, at least 9/10 of it. But meanwhile, must we not punish to protect ourselves? The protection does not protect. The violent man does not communicate his intention when he executes it or attempts its execution. More often than otherwise, it is some unofficial person who catches or stops him. If he is a born criminal, or in other words an insane man, he should, I reiterate, be treated as a sick person, not punished, not made to suffer. If he is one of the accidental criminals, his act will not be repeated, his punishment will always be with him. If he is of the middle class, your punishment will not reform him, it will only harden him, and it will not deter others. As for thieves, the great thief is within the law, or he buys it. And as for the small one, see what you do. To protect yourself against him, you create a class of persons who are sworn to the service of the club and the revolver, a set of spies, a set whose business is to deal constantly with these unhappy beings, who in rare instances are softened thereby, but in the majority of cases become hardened to their work as butchers, to the use of the knife. A set whose business it is to serve, sell, and lock and key. And lastly, the lowest infamy of all, the hangman. Does anyone want to shake his hand, the hand that kills for pay? Now, against all these persons individually there is nothing to be said. They may probably be very humane, well-intentioned persons when they start in. But the end of all this is imbrutement. One of our dailies recently observed that, quote, men in charge of prisons have but too often been men who ought themselves to have been prisoners, end quote. The anarchist does not agree with that. He would have no prisons at all. But I am quite sure that if the editor himself were put in the prison keeper's place, he too would turn hard, and the opportunities of the official criminal are much greater than those of the unofficial one. Lawyer and governmentalist as he was, Ingersoll said, quote, it is safe to say that governments have committed far more crimes than they have prevented, end quote. Then why create a second class of parasites worse than the first? Why not put up with the original one? Moreover, you have another thing to consider than the simple problem of a wrong inflicted upon a guilty man. How many times has it happened that the innocent man has been convicted? I remember an instance of a man convicted of murder in Michigan. He had served 27 years in Jackson Penitentiary, for Michigan is not a hang state, when the real murderer, dying, confessed. And the state pardoned that innocent man, because it was the quickest legal way to let him out. I hope he has been able to pardon the state. Not very long ago a man was hanged here in the city. He had killed his superintendent. Some doctors said he was insane. The government experts said he was not. They said he was faking insanity when he proclaimed himself Jesus Christ, and he was hanged. Afterwards the doctors found 2 cysts in his brain. The state of Pennsylvania had killed a sick man, and as long as punishments exist, these mistakes will occur. If you accept the principle at all, you must accept, with it, the blood guilt of innocent men. Not only this, but you must accept also the responsibility for all the misery which results to others whose lives are bound up with that of the convict. For even he is loved by someone, much loved perhaps. It is a foolish thing to turn adrift a house full of children, to become criminals in turn perhaps, in order to frighten some indefinite future offender by making an example of their father or mother. Yet how many times has it not happened? And this is speaking only from the practical, selfish side of the matter. There is another, one from which I would rather appeal to you, and from which I think you would after all prefer to be appealed to. Ask yourselves, each of you, whether you are quite sure that you have feeling enough, understanding enough, and have you suffered enough, to be able to weigh and measure out another man's life or liberty, no matter what he has done. And if you have not yourself, are you able to delegate to any judge the power which you have not? The great Russian novelist Dostoevsky, in his psychological study of the same subject, traces the sufferings of a man who had committed a shocking murder. His whole body and brain are a continual prey to torture. He gives himself up, seeking relief in confession. He goes to prison, for in barbarous Russia they have not the barbarity of capital punishment for murderers, unless political ones. But he finds no relief. He remains for a year bitter, resentful, a prey to all miserable feelings. But at last he is touched by love, the silent, unobtrusive, all-conquering love of one who knew it all and forgave it all, and the regeneration of his soul began. The criminal slew, says Tolstoy. Are you better, then, when you slay? He took another's liberty, and is it the right way, therefore, for you to take his? Violence is no answer to violence. Quote, have good will to all that lives, letting unkindness die, and greed and wrath, so that your lives be made as soft airs passing by. End quote. So said Lord Buddha, the light of Asia. And another said, quote, ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, resist not him that is evil. End quote. Yet the vengeance that the great psychologist saw was futile. The violence that the greatest living religious teacher and the greatest dead ones advised no man to wreak. That violence is done daily and hourly by every little-hearted prosecutor who prosecutes at so much a day, by every petty judge who buys his way into office with common politicians' tricks, and deals in men's lives and liberties as a trader deals in pins, by every neat-souled and cheap-souled member of the Unco Guide, whose respectable bargain-counter maxims of morality have as much effect to stem the great floods and storms that shake the human will as the waving of a lady's kid glove against the tempest. Those who have not suffered cannot understand how to punish. Those who have understanding will not. I said at the beginning, and I say again, I believe that in every one of us all things are germinal. In judge and prosecutor and prison keeper too, and even in those small moral souls who cut out one undeviating pattern for all men to fit, even in them there are the germs of passion and crime and sympathy and forgiveness. And some day things will stir in them, and accuse them, and awaken them, and that awakening will come when suddenly one day there breaks upon them with realizing force the sense of the unison of life, the irrevocable relationship of the saint to the sinner, the judge to the criminal, that all personalities are intertwined and rushing upon doom together. Once in my life it was given to me to see the outward manifestation of this unison. It was in 1897. We stood upon the base of the Nelson Monument in Trafalgar Square. Below were 10,000 people packed together with upturned faces. They had gathered to hear and see men and women whose hands and limbs were scarred all over with the red-hot irons of the tortures in the fortress of Montjuic. For the crime of an unknown person, these 28 men and women, together with 400 others, had been cast into that terrible den and tortured with the infamies of the Inquisition to make them reveal that of which they knew nothing. After a year of such suffering as makes the decent human heart sick only to contemplate, with nothing proven against them, some even without trial, they were suddenly released with orders to leave the country within 24 hours. They were then in Trafalgar Square, and to the credit of old England be it said, harlot and mother of harlots though she is, for there was not another country among the great nations of the earth to which those 28 innocent people could go. For they were paupers impoverished by that cruel state of Spain in the terrible battle for their freedom. They would not have been admitted to free America. When Francesco Garner, speaking in a language which most of them did not understand, lifted his poor scarred hands, the faces of those 10,000 people moved together like the leaves of a forest in the wind. They waved to and fro, they rose and fell. The visible moved in the breath of the invisible. It was the revelation of the action of the unconscious, the fatalistic unity of man. Sometimes, even now, as I look upon you, it is as if the bodies that I see were as transparent bubbles, wherethrough the red blood boils and flows, a turbulent stream, churning and tossing and leaping, and behind us and our generation, far, far back, endlessly backwards, where all the bubbles are broken and not a ripple remains, the silent pouring of the great red river, the unfathomable river, backwards through the unbroken forest and the untilled plain, backwards through the forgotten world of savagery and animal life, back somewhere to its dark sources in deep sea and old night, the rushing river of blood. No fancy, real tangible blood, the blood that hurries in your veins while I speak, bearing with it the curses and blessings of the past. Through what infinite shadows has that river rolled? Through what desolate wastes has it not spread its ooze? Through what desperate passages has it been forced? What strength, what invincible strength is in that hot stream? You are just the bubble on its crest. Where will the current fling you ere you die? And what moment will the fierce impurities born from its sombre and tenebrous past be hurled up in you? Shall you then cry out for punishment if they are hurled up in another? If, flung against the merciless rocks of the channel, while you swim easily in the midstream, they fall back and hurt other bubbles? Can you not feel that, quote, men are the heart-beats of man, the plumes that leather his wings, storm-worn since being began with the wind and the thunder of things? Things are cruel and blind, their strength detains and deforms, and the wearying wings of the mind still beat up the stream of their storms. Still, as one swimming upstream, they strike out blind in the blast, in thunder of vision and dream and lightning of future and past. We are baffled and caught in the current and bruised upon edges of shoals. As weeds or as reeds in the torrent of things are the wind-shaken souls. Spirit by spirit goes under a foam-bell's bubble of breath, that blows and opens asunder and blurs not the mirror of death. End quote. Is it not enough that things are cruel and blind? Must we also be cruel and blind? When the whole thing amounts to so little at the most, shall we embitter it more and crush and stifle what must soon be crushed and stifled anyhow? Can we not, knowing what remnants of things dead and drowned are floating through us, haunting our brains with spectres of old deeds and scenes of violence, can we not learn to pardon our brother, to whom the spectres are more real, upon whom greater stress was laid? Can we not, recalling all the evil things that we have done, or left undone only because some scarcely perceptible weight struck down the balance, or because some kindly word came to us in the midst of our bitterness, and showed that not all was hateful in the world, can we not understand him for whom the balance was not struck down, the kind word unspoken? Believe me, forgiveness is better than wrath, better for the wrongdoer, who will be touched and regenerated by it, and better for you. And you are wrong if you think it is hard. It is easy, far easier than to hate. It may sound like a paradox, but the greater the injury, the easier the pardon. Let us have done with this savage idea of punishment, which is without wisdom. Let us work for the freedom of man from the oppressions which make criminals, and for the enlightened treatment of all the sick. And though we may never see the fruit of it, we may rest assured that the great tide of thought is setting our way, and that, quote, while the tired wave, vainly breaking, seems here no painful inch to gain, far back through creeks and inlets making, comes silent, flooding in, the main. End quote. End of Crime and Punishment.